In the episode right before this one, we talked about why doing less is actually the key to getting ahead in podcasting. And I've got my good friend Alex Sanfilippo back in the studio with us to show you how to implement this for your podcast so that you can grow your show without adding anything else to your plate. We're also going to talk about the hidden downside of so many of the AI podcasting tools that are out there, which are actually creating more and unnecessary work for you, and how to streamline that and eliminate the tools that really aren't serving the greater good of your show. So stick around because all of that and more is coming up next. Welcome to Insider Secrets to a Top 100 podcast. I'm your host, Courtney Elmer. Let's make your business binge-worthy. Alex, I'm excited to dig deeper with you on this theme of less is more in podcasting because it's not something a lot of people are talking about. In fact, most of the tools and things we have available to us today are telling us do more and less time. And so we kind of get under this assumption that we can do more and then it really doesn't benefit the growth of our show. We wind up burning out, as you mentioned in the episode right before this one. And I know that you just had a very personal experience of this for yourself within your business in noticing that you were doing too many things and that those things were not cohesive and that they weren't making sense for the person that you were here and that you are here to serve. So can you speak to that and tell us what was that like before and then paint the picture for us after, now that you have brought those things under one roof in alignment with that person that you're here to help?
Yeah, Courtney, thanks for having me back. And sure thing, I like talking about this. With a quick note, some people that are about to hear this are going to say, that doesn't seem misaligned. And here's why. Because everything I was doing was still in podcasting. And for anyone who doesn't know who I am, everything I do is podcasting. But I had multiple company names, brands, different products and services that all, once again, all serve basically the same person. Keyword there is basically the same person. And so I think, Courtney, we had 13 different things when we mapped it all out that we were doing. Some had different brand names and stuff like that. And I say that now, and it's almost shameful for me to even say it. I didn't realize what was happening until one day I was talking with someone who listens to my podcast and happens to use Podmatch as well, which is my software that goes along with, that serves podcasters, one of them. And when I was talking to her, she needed me to clarify all the other things I was doing. What is this? What is this? What is this? What I realized in that moment, Courtney, was confusion. Confusion is what I had caused among the person who I say, this is actually who I serve. Down to the core, the niche, if I put the blinders on, as we've talked about, that is who I serve. They're confused about how I show up and what I do. Therefore, I'm doing something wrong. And the quickest way for all of us to evaluate this is find out, are the people that you say you serve, that ideal avatar, that niche, the person who's listening, are they confused about all the things you do, or can they quickly articulate it? If they can't, you've not made it simple or clear enough, which probably means there's a little bit of misalignment. And so for me, Courtney, I got to the point where I was like, this isn't going to work. Everything is going into Podmatch. We have our podcast and we have Podmatch, and everything is in there. One login, one website, one roof for everything that we do. And since we've been doing that, again, I think there's 13 things total. I think at this point, we've brought 10 of them into Podmatch, and we're still a work in progress. And who knows, by the time someone hears this, perhaps it's all only Podmatch. I do hope that's the case. But since we've started doing that, we have gotten more clarity. Our brand has grown. Each of those individual things that we had that were kind of a wing of their own now get more and better traction. We're eliminating the confusion. We're narrowing it down to what we actually do, as I like to say, to a singular focus. This is the one thing we do, and it is fully aligned with the person we serve now. The better we get at that, the better our results are without changing anything from a marketing standpoint, without doing anything more. We're actually doing less. We've been able to trim down our team, to trim down the tools that we use by doing this. All around, 100%. There's no wrong way to look at it. It is completely a plus in every single way.
Well, this brings up a really powerful point too, which you said right before this was about trimming down the team and trimming down the tools. And I think many of us are under the assumption that we need more tools. I mean, something hits the market every day. I remember a couple of years ago, I was at PodFest, and this was when ChatGPT had just come out. And it was the hot topic of the conference. And people were filling up ballrooms to hear about how can we use ChatGPT. And now there's hundreds of AI tools that we could essentially plug and play when it comes to our show. So how are we actually creating more time, more work, more effort for ourselves in signing up and doing all of these different tools and things that we think are going to save us time, but it actually creates the exact opposite effect? And how much time do you feel like you're saving now that you have been able to trim that down?
This is a great question, Courtney. I actually want to take a step back real quick. The step back is, I'm going to give everyone the definition of a podcaster. The definition of being a podcaster is releasing value-adding content for your listeners on a consistent basis. You don't need a website. You don't need a YouTube channel. You don't need to be on all the social media platforms. You actually don't need to do anything other than what I just said, which is consistently release value-adding episodes for your listeners. So the step back is if you're like, I'm a podcaster, the only thing you have to do is that one thing. Going back to singular focus. Now, is that a best practice? Maybe not, but at the same time, maybe. And you have to evaluate that for yourself. The thing with all these tools, and AI is a really good example, is that just because we can do something doesn't mean we should do something about it. AI has enabled all of us to be able to do what years ago would have taken teams of, dozens of people to be able to accomplish what now we can accomplish completely on our own with certain AI tools. But does it spread us thin? Are we actually doing a good job with what we're using AI to create? Is it adding more to our plate instead of less to our plate? Because the proper usage of AI is to have less on your plate, not more. I use AI, and I use it in a lot of the different systems that we've built out, but I don't use it to do more. And some people are like, Alex, what are you talking about? An example is our website's a custom build. When we are releasing a blog post, the last step is to convert it to HTML format. Now, yes, I could go in there and put it in a notepad and write out the HTML. I do know how to do that. Or I can go to an AI tool and say, here's a complete blog post. Do not change the words, but I need you to put it in proper HTML format so I can copy paste it into my custom blog that I built. And I do that. That saves me a lot of time. Instead of saying, now can you turn this into quotes so I can use it on social media? Now can you turn it into sub-blog posts? Can you make another one that ranks better than this and do this over here? That's creating more work. So again, just because we can do more now doesn't mean that we should. It's a huge temptation, but I think that many of us, we need to take a step back and remember why we got into podcasting. Hopefully it was to podcast, right? And to get some specific singular result out of podcasting for ourselves and to serve our listeners with, not all the other things that we quote unquote should be doing to make sure we maximize the exposure.
This is a really important distinction. This is something I have found myself falling into that trap as well, where it's like, oh, just because this new AI tool exists, and let's say video, for example, repurposing your long form content into short form clips, and you sign up for one of these AI video tools that can promise you 16 viral clips in, a matter of 5 minutes or less, and then it's like you look at the clips and you're actually spending more time going through the clips, weeding out what doesn't make sense, what's cut off, what doesn't in it. And you're like, wait a minute, this was supposed to save me time and it actually doesn't. So Alex, what would you recommend for people right now who maybe do have a lot of tools that they have plugged into the various processes and systems within their podcast? Where do we begin to assess all of that and actually just clean it up and say, what do I need? What don't I need?
Yeah, to start this process, working backwards is the best way to go. So again, who you serve, what is the end result that you want that individual to take? If you don't have a product or service and you are literally just podcasting as a hobby to add value, maybe that's you, then what do you want them to feel when they're done listening? Start from that and then work your way backwards. If you do have a product or service, and maybe it's, hey, I'm going to add a ton of value, educate this person. Ultimately, they're going to turn into a lead. And this is where the lead is going to be. Map out the end and start working your way backwards is the best way to do it. And so I always tell people, begin with the end in mind with this process. Start from the end and work your way backwards. As you're working your way backwards, you can think, okay, this is the end result I want them to have. And then you can just start evaluating every little piece that you have. You used a great example of these AI tools that build out different clips and things like that. I decided not to do that at all. We don't even use TikTok. And people were like, how are you not using TikTok, right? Like it blows people's mind. But when I really thought about it, I'm like, man, the end result I want someone to have doesn't have anything to do with TikTok. And people are like, yeah, but leads, Alex. But yeah, but exposure, Alex. I'm not saying anything bad about social media. It does have its place. But you cannot view a podcast listener and a social media listener like as the same thing. So a podcast listener, social media engagement, they're not the same. Often if I'm on social media, I'm laying down on the couch scrolling through. I'm not in the right frame of mind to be like, ooh, I want to learn how to really get these insider secrets to a top 100 podcast. That's not where I'm at right now. I'm like, show me another cat video that makes me laugh. And again, I'm not dogging that. It has its place. But someone who's listening to this podcast episode is not in the same category as someone who scrolls past you on any of the social platforms. And so in my mind, I'm like, man, I'm looking at people that are serious and intentionally seeking out what I have. Therefore, I know that clips aren't the right usage for me. We actually cut out a bunch of AI tools. We were able to go down a team member because we're not creating clips like that anymore. And yes, my social media numbers are not as big as they were, but my company's bigger than it's ever been. And I'm working less than I ever have before. And I think that so many of us, so we get caught up in the vanity metric of big downloads, big engagement on social media equals big result for me and my brand. And the reality is that's just not true. And that's been proven time and time again. But we look at those outliers, the really big names that are kind of preaching that that's how they've done it. But the reality is they've got years of history behind them showing that that wasn't really what got them where they are. That is just the world they're living in now, is the benefit, the fruit of all the labor they've put in for the metrics that actually seem to work. So again, for me, if I can reverse engineer where I want my listener to end up back to what I actually need to deliver to them and cut out everything that doesn't 100% align with that, that makes a huge difference for me and for what I'm able to deliver.
This is a helpful reminder for me. And if you're new to listening to this podcast, you might not know. And Alex, I don't know if this makes us a good example or a bad example, but this show has been rebranded 4 times as I have gotten clearer and clearer and clearer on the work that I feel I am meant to do here in the world. And as a result of our most recent rebrand and really putting our stake in the ground as being in the podcasting space, in the podcasting industry, that created and generated a lot of back-end work on things that needed to be updated, and just down to our email signatures where people were telling us your link is not working here. And I'm like, yeah, because we changed the domain and it just created all of this chaos. And what our listeners may not realize is that you and I have been voice texting behind the scenes, often me panicked to you, Alex, I just don't know. I mean, it's just creating so much work and it's so much time, and you kept reminding me, Courtney, it might be work in the moment, but in the long run, it's going to be the better thing for your brand. It's going to give you the simplicity and the clarity, not only on your back end for your brain power, for your bandwidth, but on the front end too, and the people that you're here to serve, because it's going to be so crystal clear how you can help them. And I was wondering, Alex, if you could speak to expectations and the expectations that people might have or place upon themselves, like I do, where it's like, okay, if I've made this decision to simplify things and I'm going to reverse engineer this and I'm going to go through the list and I'm going to take out everything, and it can generate a lot more work in the short term. When it comes to aligning our expectations with this process, to really go all in and commit to this less is more approach, what do we need to know about that? And what reminders do we need to be giving ourselves when it comes to making sure our expectations don't get out of alignment or create more problems for us?
Our expectations are not like a happy ending. And they all lived happily ever after. And a lot of us, we think our marketing, our company, our brand, like our whole strategy is going to be like a happy ever after. I did it and it just worked for all of eternity. Like there's no brand or company that has any form of startup story or anything like that where that's ever been the reality. It's always, we were doing the wrong thing 20 different times, 20 different ways, and we finally figured it out and honed it in. And the best example I can give here is like an airplane. I live in Florida, so let's imagine I'm going to go to Hawaii, because obviously I'm just going to go to another beach. And but during that flight, what the autopilot is doing most of the time, the primary function of autopilot is to course correct. And it is course correcting the entire way. There's wind variables. There's all kinds of things. Like the earth is literally rotating while you're flying, right? There's all these variables that go into place, and it's always course correcting. If it never course corrected, by the time you hit the mile count for where you should be landing, you would be hundreds of miles away from your destination. And many of us don't believe that with our brand. We think we set it and it's going to just be perfect and it's all going to work. Rebrands are showing me that someone is growing. They are trying things. It's working. And often, again, just bring organic with your audience. They love seeing that. They love seeing your own evolution and your growth as well. And so the expectation can't be, I just need this thing to work and to grow and to be huge like all these other companies. No, stop looking at someone else's, like where they are today. They've been at it forever. Instead, say, you know what? My expectation is that this is going to change, but it's because I'm getting better at serving somebody. I'm growing and evolving myself. At the end of the day, everyone's in a transformational journey. And Courtney, a great example is this podcast, Insider Secrets to a Top 100 Podcast. Once someone, let's just imagine they go through your whole program, they learn a lot about you, they are a top 10 podcaster. They're probably not going to listen to your show anymore. And anyone who hears that's like, oh, that's terrible, Alex. No, the reality is you serve them on their journey of transformation from where they were to where they wanted to get. They got there. Now they're moving on to something else. Another example of this is grief-related podcasts. I had somebody recently, she told me, she's like, yeah, my podcast has really good retention. Like people have been listening for multiple years. And I didn't say it, but I'm like, well, are you actually helping them get through their grief? Because if you are, they should not listen to your podcast very long. They should listen for maybe a year, and then they should move on to something else. They need to be getting out of it. And so the reminder that I'm sharing here is the expectation has to be, I'm serving somebody through a portion of their journey, a portion of their life. And once they're there, once I've helped them, they're going to move on. They might remember me. They might be back one day. They might send somebody someday. But at the end of the day, this is how I help. And as they're evolving and changing, so are you. And that's the expectation we need to have, is that this is going to change. It's going to evolve, and we get better and more accurate at serving the people that I am best equipped to serve based off my own life circumstances.
I think we need to title this episode, Your Business and Your Podcast is Not a Crock Pot. You can't set it and forget it. That was what came up to me when you were like, you can't set it and forget it. It is going to change. It is going to be ever evolving. And that's a good thing. It's a good thing. And I know for myself, speaking for myself, I'm so guilty of saying, well, once this is done, I can check the box, I can close the tab in my brain, and then I don't have to touch it again. And the next thing you know, a year later, and sometimes not even that long, you're like, wait a minute, I do need to touch it again. Case in point, our program has evolved over the last 4 years. I update it usually once a year. We're always updating, tweaking things, but I'll do like a big program update, a big sweep once a year, bring everything up to speed in light of industry changes and all these things. Literally after I had closed that box in my brain this year, I already have a list of 22 other things that need to happen for the next upgrade. And so I think allowing yourself to be in that space and in the tension of it's never going to be done and letting yourself be okay there, even though it's uncomfortable, especially for us type A people who want to check the boxes, that right there is going to be more key to your growth than anything else you could do, than any AI tool you could plug in, than any other tactic or strategy you could apply to your podcast and to your business. So Alex, thank you for reminding us of this. I really appreciate you and everything that you stand for. And I'm curious to know what's next for you on the horizon in terms of your podcast, your brand. What are you excited for here in the next 6 to 12 months?
Yeah, and this kind of reinforces everything you just said, and it will kind of answer the question as well. But and I want to challenge everyone to do this. Stop doing something. Find something to stop doing that just really isn't serving you or serving the people that you know you're serving. Even if you really like it, find that thing and say no to it. It takes a lot of courage to do that. And for me, that's one of the things that's moving forward is there's a lot of things I'm not doing anymore. The way I like to say it is every yes has to be protected by 1,000 no's. So every time I say yes, there's 1,000 things I have to say no to. When I say yes to serving somebody, there's 1,000 other people I have to say no to along the way. And so for me, what we're doing is we're getting rid of the temptation. We're trying our best just to say no instantly to anything that isn't directly connected to our podcast and to Podmatch, because those are the two things. So our future moving forward is getting better at serving the person we serve through exactly that one thing that we do really well. And again, the more I do this, the better their result is, the better that they say that we're serving and helping them. And also the more of my time is freed up to get better at, once again, doing that exact thing.
Alex, this is so true. Thank you so much for these reminders that doing less is always more, especially when it comes to podcasting. And if you're listening right now and you found this episode and the one before it helpful, I would love it if you would take a minute and leave a review and let us know. And I'm going to challenge you too, to pick one thing that Alex shared inside either of these episodes and go out and implement it in your podcast over the next 7 days. And then stick around, because in the next episode, we are going to be diving deeper into your listener psychology. And I'm going to show you 3 proven language patterns that you can use inside of your episodes to create not just hyper effective content, but hyper-relevant content that's going to increase desire and demand for whatever it is that you offer, which ultimately, when done well over time, is going to lead to more click-throughs on your calls to actions in your podcast and more conversions from listeners to leads. So don't go anywhere, because all of that and more is coming up next to help you make your business binge-worthy.